Well, as you know, we're working our way through the letter to the Philippians. We're going to begin tonight by reading from the Message translation, paraphrase. Okay? And then when we get into a little bit more of the technical stuff, we'll use the NIV. And the title of today's sermon is The Advance of the Gospel in Adversity. So this is what the Message says. It's Paul writing, and he's in prison at this point. I want to report to you, friends, that my imprisonment here has had the opposite of its intended effect. Instead of being squelched, the message has actually prospered. All the soldiers here and everyone else too found out that I'm in jail because of this Messiah. That piqued their curiosity. And now they've learned all about him. Not only that, but most of the followers of Jesus here have become far more sure of themselves in the faith than ever, speaking out fearlessly about God, about the Messiah. It's true that some here preach Christ because with me out of the way, they think they'll step right into the spotlight. But the others do it with the best part in the world. One group is motivated by pure love, knowing that I am here defending the message, wanting to help. The others, now that I'm out of the picture, are merely greedy, hoping to get something out of it for themselves. Their motives are bad. They see me as their competition. And so the worse it goes for me, the better they think for them. So how am I to respond? I've decided that I really don't care about their motives, whether mixed, bad, or indifferent. Every time one of them opens his mouth, Christ is proclaimed. So I just cheer them on. I'm going to keep that celebration going because I know how it's going to turn out. So that's our reading from Philippians, and these are the verses that I've been given to speak about tonight. So last week, Ryan covered how the church in Philippi began. So here's a little map of where Jolene is on holiday. Where Philippi is. Almost between Turkey and Greece, but very much in Greece, is the city of Philippi. It was an important city. Lots of Romans went there to retire, and it was like a real reward to be given citizenship and to be able to stay there. And the Philippian church was started by Paul when he came across a woman called Lydia by a river, and we're told that the Lord opened her heart. And she became a believer. She was a wealthy business person and a dealer in cloth. And the church started in her house. Probably when Paul was on his second missionary journey around 49, 51. And Paul is now in prison, probably in Rome. We're not 100% sure, but he probably was imprisoned at Rome when he wrote this in the early 60s AD. So I've got a question for you tonight. What must it have been like for Paul to be in prison in Rome? And the answer is far worse than we can imagine. In all likelihood, Paul would have been in this very prison. They called it the Tullianum, and this was a very famous prison. By the way, getting sent to prison wasn't a punishment. Nowadays, people go to prison, and that is the punishment. Back in the Roman Empire, your punishment was death or flogging or whatever it was. You didn't go to prison to serve a sentence. You just went there to wait for whatever was going to happen to you. And here is the very prison that diagram is of. This is the prison in Rome, and tradition has it that this is where Paul stayed. And that hole that man is looking into, that's where they would lower the really naughty prisoners into that lower section. And you were kind of pretty much left to fend for yourself. There were no prisoners' rights and that kind of thing. Prisoners were filthy crowded. And that is the actual prison. It's been turned into a church. But can you imagine what it must have been? Yeah, everything gets turned into churches. If any apostle went anywhere, or a mother of an apostle, or anyone that even knew an apostle, that place becomes a church. So the prison is now a church. But it was definitely not a church when Paul stayed there. There are two issues that I want to share with you tonight that arise from this passage. And the first has to do with how God was still working through Paul's life, even though he was in a terrible place. So that's the first lesson. We're going to unpack a bit. And the second lesson is about people's motives for why they do ministry. So let's start with the first one. The advance of the gospel even when things are bad, even when things are rough. Paul says here in verse 12 of chapter 1, I want you to know, brothers, there's something here Paul wants us to get. He wants us to grasp this one truth, and it's this. I want you to know, brothers, that what has happened to me has really served to advance the gospel. We often fall into the trap of thinking that when God is at work, everything's going to be nice. Because obviously if God's blessing, then stuff is nice. Right? That's the thinking. But that's not how God works. God doesn't just work when things are going well and everything's nice. Paul's here in a dungeon with goodness knows who else down there. And he's saying, wow, I'm in a terrible place, but God is working powerfully through my life. And this is the correct attitude that we should have as Christians. I want you to know, brothers, that what has happened to me has served to advance the gospel. We so often think, wow, if a bad thing happens, if something doesn't go the way I'd hope, then God can't use me. God can't work in this situation. My girlfriend, boyfriend breaks up with me. Maybe I don't have a girlfriend or boyfriend to break up with. Maybe I failed my course. Maybe I have a disability, get fired, have an accident, get sick, lose my business, or some other injustice takes place in my life. Whatever bad stuff might be happening in your life tonight, this message from Paul is God can use the situation you're in. He can still work in and through your life for the gospel to advance. And sometimes the gospel advances better when things are difficult than when they're easy. I want you to know that as a result of what's happened, the whole palace guard, verse 13, and everyone else, they now understand that I'm in chains for Christ. And there's been an effect on other Christians. Because of my chains, most of the brothers in the Lord have got all bold and are encouraged and they're fearless. Everyone in the prison is hearing about Jesus. Paul lived with a sense of God's providence in his life. And I want to talk to you about this tonight, because the more chaotic our world gets, and the more crazy stuff happens, the more sure we need to be about this basic theological doctrine. That God is indeed at work in all things for our good, for those that love him and who have been called. Think of the story of Esther. This young Jewish woman, nobody knows she's Jewish. She's entered into a beauty competition against her will, in all likelihood. She has her arm twisted. And the prize of the beauty competition was not a Mercedes and a book contract. You got to be a prostitute. That was the prize that you won. You were given to the king to be part of his harem. And so this is a terrible thing that's happening to Esther. But yet God is at work in this situation and uses it to rescue his people. And in the book of Esther, there's coincidence after coincidence, things happening, and God's name isn't mentioned, but we know it is God at work in the situation. Think of the story of Joseph. This is again is one of those great stories that emphasize the providence of God. His brothers didn't like him much, so they wanted to make a fast buck, and they sold their brother Joseph into slavery. And years later, there's a reconciliation, and Joseph can say to his brothers, remember that terrible thing you did to me, that terrible thing that broke our father's heart. You pretended I was dead. You sold me off as a slave. Do you know what, brothers? While you were doing that terrible thing, God was at work. It was actually, I don't know if it was God, but you were doing that terrible thing, but God was doing something else in the situation. And he used your terrible sin against me to bring me here, to save many lives. You meant evil against me, Genesis 50, verse 9. But God meant it for good. Do you see how God can take a bad situation, even Paul's imprisonment, whatever's going on in your life tonight, and he can still work and use it to bring good out of it for you and for others. Proverbs 16 tells us that in his heart a man plans his course, but the Lord determines his steps. There is the unseen hand of God orchestrating events in all of our lives. The Bible teaches there's no such thing as chance or coincidence. The lot is cast into the lap. That's kind of gambling there. Casting lots. You know what that is. But it's every decision is from the Lord. And so it goes on. Friends, the message out of Philippians 1, or one of the messages, is this idea that no matter where you are, God can use your situation to advance the gospel and to be an inspiration and an encouragement to other Christians. Is that something you believe? Will you take 30 seconds right now to just think about what I've said? Think about your life. What's actually going on in your life right now? And try to think how God could perhaps be using this to advance the gospel and to be an encouragement to other believers. Go. I hope you're living with a sense of God's sovereignty and providence in your life. It's the attitude that Paul has here, and we need it too. Okay, part 2 begins in verse 15, and it has to do with our motivation for ministry. And it's quite a complicated passage. Paul writes, it's true that some priests preach Christ out of envy and rivalry, others out of goodwill. The latter do so in love, knowing that I'm put here for the defense of the gospel. The former preach Christ out of selfish ambition, not sincerity, supposing that they can stir up trouble for me while I'm in chains. The reason this passage is hard to understand is why would there be people out there preaching the true gospel out of envy and rivalry? Why would somebody be preaching out of selfish ambition? But yet Paul says that's happening. Why would somebody want to stir up trouble for Paul, who is an apostle and he's already in prison? I mean, how much worse can it get for the poor guy? Why would there be other Christians, and you have to use inverted commas there, other Christians preaching the gospel and stirring up trouble for Paul? It's really a passage that's hard to understand. Because the message that's being preached is the correct message. Because Paul says, you know what? Whether they preach with a good motive or a bad, I'm just glad the gospel of Jesus is being preached. He's not saying, gee, these are false teachers, terrible stuff. He's saying, well, I'm going to rejoice that at least the gospel is being preached. So let's talk about people's motives for doing ministry. We need to look elsewhere in the Bible. What are some of the bad motives that people can have for doing ministry? Well, the first big name that came to mind was Judas. Here's a guy who was the treasurer of the 12 disciples. And he kept dipping into the offering bag. And his final act was to betray Jesus for the paltry fee of 30 pieces of silver. This is one of the men that Jesus chose. He went around doing ministry with everybody else. Nobody thought anything different of Judas. But yet his heart was obviously way off course. And was he in it for the money? Think of Balaam. It's an interesting story. A guy that was willing to preach and declare and proclaim and kind of say pretty much whatever, brought in the best sum of money. But he found out that didn't work too well. You can read that story if you're interested. Gehazi's another guy who was in it for the money. Elisha, his master, healed somebody. And they came back with a whole truckload of gifts and money to bless Elisha. And Elisha's like, no thanks, I'm not in it for the money. I just healed you because I want God to bless you. And that was the end of it. But Elisha thought, gee, what a waste. I mean, here's a guy's bought a whole lot of gifts. I'm a humble servant. I'm going to go zoot off and say, actually, my master's changed his mind. We will take all the gifts. And that didn't work out too well for him either. But money and financial gain is often a wrong motivator for preachers of the gospel. Be it the nice variety where people have to stick with things they know aren't actually true in ministry because they can't, whatever, they don't want to lose their pension. I mean, that happens. Thankfully not in our churches because we're not that kind of church. But there are situations where guys are literally stuck and they've got to do stuff for the sake of, well, I live in a church house or whatever it is. And then we've got the prosperity preachers out there, kind of going on TV, begging for money because they need it for their new jet. What is the prosperity teaching? I picked this out from the Babylon Bee. Who invented it? A devout follower of Christ named Judas Iscariot laid the foundation for the prosperity gospel when he successfully named and claimed a bag full of money in the name of Jesus. So there's a huge amount of abuse out there, guys. There really is, of people exploiting the poorest of the poor and usually the less educated kind of a person to fund lavish lifestyle. And we as Christians really need to wake up to this. Again, thankfully, in a church like this, there's great accountability. There are tight financial controls. But in many ministries around the world today, terrible stuff happens. People use orphanages in Africa to raise money in other countries, and the money never gets to the dear orphan. There are people doing things with bad motives. Some other motives can be, sometimes people like to have power over other people. And I thought of Simon Magus, who saw how the Holy Spirit was touching people in Samaria, and he thought to himself, gee, I'd like to be able to do that. Like put my hand on people and watch them shake and whatever. I mean, that looks so awesome. Who can I pay to get this gift? Well, he wouldn't have thought it was a gift at that point. And Peter says to him, may your money perish with you if you thought you could buy the gift of God with money. But there's a guy trying to do a bit of ministry, but that his motive is all wrong. Paul tells us, mark this, in the last days, there are going to be people who are lovers of themselves, lovers of money, having a form of godliness. It looks kind of Christian in that it's all good, but it's not. Have nothing to do with them, he says. They are those that worm their way into homes and gain control over weak-willed women. Terrible scripture. There are a lot of abuses that happen, but we don't want to go into that tonight. It's all just too depressing. So who are these guys that are breaking Paul's heart while he is in prison? He says they're preaching away, and they're doing it out of envy. They're doing it out of rivalry. Where are those verses? Oh, okay. In envy, verse 15, and rivalry. Verse 17, they're motivated by selfish ambition, and they're stirring up trouble for me. The horrific truth is, these must actually be other church leaders who in some perverse way are actually quite pleased that Paul is safely out of the way, and now they can get on and do what they want to do. How tragic that Paul had to deal with that along with his imprisonment. And now I'm done. Here's the final summary. Do you have the same perspective of what's going on in your life? That even if you find yourself in a dungeon, you know that God is at work in that situation and that he can use it to advance his gospel and to encourage and strengthen other Christians. Remember that God is sovereign and we can rest in him and know that he is at work in all things for our good. Lord, we are so encouraged by this great apostle that even when he was in that terrible dungeon, we don't know if he was on the first floor or shoved through that hole into the lower part of that prison. But we're amazed that he could still write a letter and he could say what people intended for evil has actually resulted in the gospel advancing. The whole prison base camp, the guards, they all have heard the gospel. And other Christians have been inspired by my faithfulness in adversity. Guys, can we say that? That God is at work, that we are being an example. And can we also hear what Paul writes about our motive for doing ministry? Lord, may our motives always be pure and pleasing to you in every way. Keep us from the love of money, the love of people, the love of authority, and all the other pitfalls and traps that come with preaching your precious word. We ask it in